I think the for me the analog there is if you hired a brand new person and you threw them into the mix and said, go ahead and solve this difficult problem for our company, right? Your expectation should be that AI will do roughly that. It'll do whatever a naive person might show up and try to do. And so it's all about educating, right? Having the continuous learning of some kind that happens. And if you reference back to that MIT study, and they mentioned learning like 20 plus times in that, right? There's this magic thing that if you could get it to learn what you're trying to do, it's going to work much better. And learning doesn't mean necessarily that it's just discovering and it's learning. But you have to engineer learning into the AI agent. It's not a thing you get for free today. So I think that's the the parallel to a brand new hire, right, that you throw into the mix. No matter how smart they are, you're going to have to give them training. You're going to have to tell them this is right, this is wrong. You have to iterate with any new entity that you expect to be able to accomplish a goal on your behalf.
Alon, I'm curious how you would sort of advise a company about. I mean, obviously trying to find ROI and they're trying to find what are the right use cases to chase. But there's also this aspect of this technology is changing literally every month in a pretty significant way. If you're a company, any large enterprise, how would you approach sort of balancing those things,
Yeah.
maximizing my ROI, but also staying on top of the latest in developments and experimenting with those and bringing those forward?
Right.
How should you think about that?
Well, I would tell you what not to do first. What not to do is not sit on the sideline and wait until it's perfect, because that's a surefire disaster. Because somebody else will figure that out before you if you're waiting
That's
for
the
the
advice.
perfect
Yeah.
moment. So then it becomes a question of, okay, where do we think there are viable projects? And I think you end up sorting them into things that are sort of tactical and easy, but maybe the payoff is not that huge. And then sort of upper right quadrant types of projects that are much more aspirational, but much higher impact. And I think you want a mix of those kinds of projects in a sense that you should be thinking ahead to what does my industry look like a few years from now, if
Mm.
AI in fact continues the curve it's on, and how do I meet that future by starting the work on reengineering processes, thinking about where things that are highly manual today, that could be, if you had an infinite number of smart interns that you could train up, what would you train them on doing on your behalf? Meanwhile, there's probably some low hanging fruit, right? So some of the low hanging fruit may be, make sure you've got good adoption of, let's say, development organization, right, of the latest engineering tools, in the customer services area, in processes that you could map out today and can say, okay, here's the touch points in this process, and it doesn't take. There's not a lot of learning that I would have to bring somebody on board to teach them how to do this process. Those are sort of very logical places to start.
Alone, the other thing I would add to that is, if you're sort of just starting down this path, whether you're a medium-sized business, large business, recognize that from a technology standpoint, it's unlikely that you're going to architect or sort of decide on a set of tooling that is going to be the answer for years. And that's historically been the pattern where people were able to settle on an architecture. We got it. Now we'll just, we'll sort of scaffold up from there, which is why I believe that ROI is actually the only future proofing right now. If you think you're going to future proof from a technology standpoint, I would be wary of that. Mike, let me know if you disagree with this, because I sort of see you shaking your head there. But I think there's a good chance you may throw away the technology 12 months from now and re-implement or re-solve the same problem better, faster, easier,
I
which
think
is
that's
that
why
you
people
solve
aren't
today.
start- I
But
think that's why people are not starting and sitting on the
I,
sidelines. They're afraid
Yeah,
to do that.
they don't know when to
I
start.
agree.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
the fact is, if you go to some of the basics, some of the fundamental building blocks, the OpenAI SDK or the Pydantic tool calling definitions, these are really atomic things in the AI world. They are consistent for the last 24 months, right? They have not changed. Now, if you float up that stack and you start using some of the higher level components and you start kind of giving up more control, then you do find that, yeah, you are in a sort of a flavor of the month thing, and you're betting that the thing you're focused on is the one that's going to take off and really take shape. So that's kind of the
But
thing.
you may build something today that GPT 7.0 or
Yeah.
GPT 7 can do, and
Yes.
you never needed to invest in building it.
So
A couple of things to add there. The one thing is the cost of reinventing software is much lower than it used to be.
Yeah.
So it used to take us, let's say, some solid work to build a decent prototype. So you might spend a month, 2 months building what looks like a good prototype that answers the question, what does this software do to somebody who could see it? And now you could do that, in a matter of days. And then to the extent I want to migrate something, I've built something and now I want to change the underlying technology. That used to be a major migration effort. Now it's quite a bit more accelerated. If you do a good job, the AI assistants help you build test cases for the software you've got, help you try to automate some of the migration pains and rebuild a new system. So I think being afraid of throwing away software is not the reason, or it's much less of an obstacle. I think in the calculation of whether you should pursue things now.
and there's some things
The other thing
that
that's fascinating is, yeah,
go.
last thing I would add is that what's interesting is when you get down to the using AI assistants to build stuff, they tend to favor things that are highly documented. And so, ironically, like even building like recently, another implementation of a chat agent, it wants to use the chat completion code. And if I really tell it hard, no, use the new client response API. Don't use the chat completion. It's reluctant to do it almost. Like it kind of keeps pulling back to like, oh no, here's the stuff that's highly documented that I know how to do. And so I think there is this interesting dichotomy here where you want to lean into the AI assistants, which means they're wanting to use the things they've been trained on, even if you provide them documentation to sort of steer them in a different direction. So you kind of end up with the stuff that works.
What you're pointing out there is a fundamental principle of neural networks, right? And in neural networks, there is a training bias. If it is trained 10 times on one thing and one time on another, it's almost naturally going to select that first one more often. And this is a key reason why people interacting with language models can actually have a leg up, because a model might discover something that's happening in your business, but it's still going to be timid about exploiting that opportunity. While a human looks at it and says, oh my gosh, that's a really cool insight.